Welcome to Book Talk. This is Pete talking today about a book called The Power Through Prayer. An amazing book by Ian Bounds. It's one of these books that's just loaded with gems of it's actually it seems it's actually written, I think, for preachers, but actually it's very informative and really a lot of this in terms of prayer. Obviously, the preaching stuff is going to be more for the preachers, but a lot of the prayer stuff backing that up applies to just about everybody. It really should. So this is one of the ones. There's a lot here, so I can only touch on a few points. But I'll try to touch on a few key points about Ian Bound's excellent book. So one thing Bound says is he talks about the early Christians. He says to them, preaching meant self-denying, self-crucifying, serious, toilsome martyr business. The early Christians. So he's actually talking. I don't know if he realizes this. I suppose he does, but he's talking about Catholics. And it's interesting he says that because some of the things he does do seem, even though he's a Protestant, some of the things he some of the things he does and his ways are kind of Catholic ways. As he says, to them preaching meant self-denying, self-crucifying, serious, toilsome martyr business. He was a serious guy. That's E.M. Bounds. For him, you don't just get up and preach. For him, spending nights, staying up all night, night after night, in order to be inspired by God, to not just speak the word from the book, from the Bible. That's dead preaching, to just get up and start preaching the word, according to Ian Bounds. He says, no, you have to pray. You have to pray and over those words and wait for the God's anointing upon those words, so they come alive to you based on who you are and your whole life experiences, enlivened by the Spirit, bringing those words to life through long hours of prayer. And so that's a lot of what he's talking about in this book, is how it's so important for preachers to do this, to go through this and put many hours into sermons. And I certainly know of a Catholic deacon who told me he does the exact same thing. So and of course the early fathers the early Christians, the early fathers, they were of course Catholics. Some of them some of them alive during the life of Christ, or right after the death of Christ. That's actually how the early Christians, that's how they interpreted Christianity. Even those who were alive when Christ was alive, and those who were alive maybe in the next generation or shortly after the death of Christ, they weren't into prosperity gospel or anything like that. They were much closer to what Bounds is talking about here. So he says the sermon should be the result of prayer. That's kind of what we just talked about. And he says God's acquaintance is not made hurriedly. So it doesn't do to just sit down for 5 minutes and pray. He talks about staying up all night in prayer. In fact, he points out that Jesus does that in the Bible. And he talks about how of course, in the Bible, Daniel is known for praying 3 times a day. And according to Ian Bounds, those were, he's put a lot of time into those times of prayer. And King David would pray three times a day. So all of this to say, much prayer is needed for the preacher. And incidentally, not many people are aware of it, but King David was in fact a priest. And but the thing about it is that it's what applies to preachers and priests applies just almost as much to everyday Catholics and Christians. They should also be doing this. Now, they don't need to prepare sermons. Obviously, they don't have to prepare to preach, but they need to be spending a lot of time in the Word and praying over those words and bringing them to life in their own lives, much the same as a preacher would, because that's where the fruitfulness will come from, as Ian Bounds explains in his book. One example he gives of this, of what this picture of what it looks like in the life of a preacher. He talks about David Brainerd, who preached to Indians back in the old days. He said Brainerd lived a life of holiness in prayer. This is some guy out in the old, out in the wilderness, looking for Indians and praying to Indians. Brainerd lived a life, he's all by himself. He's out there. So Brainerd lived a life of holiness and prayer. His diary is full of the record of his seasons of fasting, meditation, and retirement. The time he spent in private prayer amounted to many hours daily. When I return home, he said, and give myself to meditation, prayer, and fasting, my soul longs for mortification, self-denial, humility, and divorcement from all things of the world. So this is a Protestant, but it sounds just like a modern day devout Catholic who would talk this way, like a really devout Catholic. But this was a Protestant. This was just how he understood the faith. So yeah, that's modern. He talks about fasting. Fasting isn't just about health, which is how it's kind of sold these days in pop culture. Fasting is a spiritual discipline that goes with fasting. Fasting and prayer are straight out of the Bible, and so he talks about fasting. My prayer longs for mortification. That's a term common Catholic term, mortification, which is denying of self. Denying of self. As Christians, we're not here to indulge our flesh. We're to walk by the Spirit and not by the flesh. It's straight out of the New Testament from St. Paul. Over and over, we hear these kind of directions if we're paying attention. So that's it. Just to give you, that's just a taste of Power Through Prayer by Ian Bounds. It's an excellent book on prayer, one of the best I've read, and I've read many, so recommend it. Ian Bounds, Power Through Prayer. Thanks for watching. God bless.